Hi everyone and welcome back to your final lesson in the Python short course. Today we're going to focus on working with Python lists as well as dictionaries. With that being said, let's have a look at the objectives for today's lesson. The objectives for today's lesson is as follows. First, we'll distinguish between the lists and dictionaries in Python, and then next we'll move on to a practical demonstration where we'll actually work with lists as well as dictionaries. Let's start by simply defining Python lists. Lists are used to store multiple data items in a single variable. So far, we've become accustomed to storing only a single value in a variable. Lists, on the other hand, provide us with a lot more flexibility. Now, what exactly are Python dictionaries? Dictionaries, much like lists, are used to store data values. With dictionaries, we can also store multiple values in a single object. The difference is that when you want to access a dictionary, you must use the concept of key value pairs. And this essentially means that every value in a dictionary has a key associated with it. Now, when working with Python lists and dictionaries, there are a couple of properties that we must be cognizant of. And some of these properties are either similar or different. Let's start off by looking at lists. First of all, lists are ordered in nature, which means that they range from 0 to any sort of upper range. Lists are also mutable, which means that we can alter the values inside of a list. Next, a list also does allow duplicates, which might be useful. And finally, lists are also indexed, which means we can call a specific index in a given list to retrieve a value. So what about the properties of dictionaries? Well, much like lists, dictionaries are also ordered in nature. They are mutable, which means that they can change. However, dictionaries do not allow us to add any sort of duplicate values. Now, here is an example of a list in Python. In this example, we've created a variable called myCars, and we've essentially built a list. We create lists simply by using the square bracket notation. This means that we need to open up with the square bracket and close off with a square bracket. In our list, we've got 3 items: Toyota, BMW, as well as Tesla. These are all strings. One thing to be extremely mindful of is that when working with lists, we count from 0 and not from 1. And this is simply just because of the computer logic. And then finally, we just print the values out. Here's an example of a dictionary. In this example, we created a variable called cardict. We then set this equal to the items associated with this dictionary. Now, the way this works is a bit different. Notice that we open up with curly braces and we end off with curly braces as well. We also have several data items associated with this dictionary. In the first case, we have brand, which is the key, and associated with that key is the value Tesla. Likewise, we also have the key model, where the value associated with that key is X. And lastly, we have year, where the value associated with the year key is 2022. We essentially just print the dictionary out, and these are the values. Unlike lists, when trying to access a value inside of our dictionary, we must call the key. And finally, it's time for our practical demonstration. So without further ado, let's dive right in and let's start scripting. Now that I have my PyCharm environment open under the lesson 8 folder structure, I'm going to start scripting. And we'll start with lists since these tend to be the easiest between the two. So I've added a comment over here just so that we can keep track of how to start creating a list as well as the properties associated with lists. The first list I'm going to create is car list, and I'm going to set this equal to keep in mind that you want to work with square brackets. I'm going to set this equal to the list of cars. So Toyota, and then we want to add a comma after the string, and we'll go Jaguar. We want to make sure we wrap this in our quotation marks. So I'll go Jaguar, separated by another comma, and I'm going to add the value Tesla over here. Excellent. So keep in mind that when we count in terms of lists, we count from 0, 1, and 2 instead of 1, 2, and 3. And again, this is simply just because this is exactly how computers count. Now I'll print this list out. so that we can actually see what is inside of our list. And I'll simply pass in car list as my parameter for the print function. So we'll run this now and we can see our output at the bottom. This is all good and well because all we've done was we've just printed exactly what we created over here. But if we wanted to play around with lists, there are a bunch of functions associated with lists. And because we have these functions at our disposal, we can really create some really awesome programs. So I'm going to call car list over here, and then I'll call a function on this list. Keep in mind, this is a list object. So I'm calling a function on this object to do some sort of computation. And I'm going to say append. And this is just going to append another data item to my list. So I'll add the car Dodge, and then we'll print this out as well. So I'll say print car list, and we will be able to see the difference. So I'll run my code now, and notice that we've added another item to our list. So this is what the append function does. This allows us to add an item to our list. Keep in mind that if you call append, that means you're going to append at the end of the list. So this will naturally be the next object. However, if we wanted to insert something at a specific point in our existing list, we can do this as well. To achieve this, we need to use the insert function. So I'm going to call my car list object once again, and I'll say .insert. And now we need to pass in two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the index, or the point in our array, as to where we want to add this value, as well as the actual value. So I'm going to add this in at, let's say, point number 2, or at index number 2, and I'm going to give it a value of Porsche as well. So I'll just open up my quotation marks, and there we go, Porsche. So let's print this list out once again. So I'll say print car list, and if we run our code, you'll notice that Porsche was added to the second index, and we can validate this by counting from the first item 0, 1, and 2. So that worked perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to working with lists, notice that we currently only have strings in our list. However, we can actually add numerics as well. So I'll add 1 and 25. So I'll run our code from scratch, and notice that we now have integers inside of our list, which is great because you might run into a use case where you'll need strings as well as integers inside of your list. Now, we've inserted and we've appended, but what about removing? We can do this as well. I'll say car list dot the remove function, and I'm going to remove the value 25. So I'm going to target the specific value over here, and then we'll print this list once again, print car list. And if we run our code, you'll notice that the value 25 was subtracted from our most recent list. Excellent. So what else can we do with lists? Well, we can also update a specific value inside of our list. So what I'll do over here is I'll call car list once again. And this approach is going to work slightly differently because I'm not going to call a function. Instead, I'll add the square braces over here, and then I'll pass the value 0 in. And I'll explain what's happening here in a second. I'll set this equal to a new car of Lexus, and then I'll print the car list. But before we print the car list, let's have a look at our list as it currently is. Notice that at the 0 index, I have Toyota, and we've validated this by printing the list out several times. However, what I've achieved here was I targeted the list, and then I specified at the 0th index, which is this one over here, set that index or that data value equal to Lexus. So what we've effectively done was just updated that value. So I'll run my code now, and notice that I now have Lexus instead of Toyota. And that is it for lists. There's one other cool feature of lists that I really want to show you, and this is going to be based on what we've done in a previous lesson with loops. Now, when working in programming, we'll often find that we have these terms called arrays, which are very, very similar to lists in Python programming. And if we use an array or a list in combination with a loop, what we can actually do is print out every single item inside of our list or our array. So I'll simply call for car in car list. And because this is a loop, we need to make sure we have indentation, and I'll say print car. So let's evaluate what exactly is going on over here. All we've done was we've targeted our list, we've added that list inside of a loop, and we created a variable inside of that loop called car. So as we iterate through each instance of the data items inside of our list, we'll just add it from our car list into car, and we'll print out the value of car in the given cycle or iteration of our loop. So let's run this, and you'll see that I managed to print out every single value inside of my list. Now this is important because as you progress through Python and other programming languages, you'll often find that arrays or lists are frequently used with loops. Great, so now that we've concluded the session on lists, let's move over to dictionaries. So I'm going to create a new dictionary over here called cardict, and I'll set this equal to curly braces. Remember, this is how we assign values to our dictionary, and the first key over here is going to be brand, and this key has a value associated with it, which is Jaguar. And then I need to also make sure I add a comma at the end of here. But before we do that, we need to wrap this inside of our quotation marks just to make sure that we do have a string over here. And then on a new line, I'll add model, and I'll give this key a value of F type, which is one of my favorite sports cars. And finally, I'll have drive train over here. So drive train, and I'll give this a value of rear wheel, and that's it. So let's evaluate what we have for a second. So we've got a variable called cardict, and we've assigned that variable a dictionary. We know it's a dictionary because of the format. So inside of my cardict, I have a key by the name of brand, which has a value associated with it of Jaguar. I've got a model key with a value of F type. I've got a drivetrain key as well as the rear wheel value associated with that key. So what exactly can we do with dictionaries? Much like we've had functions with lists, we also have functions when it comes to dictionaries. I'm actually going to clear my console over here. And the first thing we'll do is simply just print out our cardict. And we essentially want to target the model over here. So let's print this. And you'll notice that my value associated with the model key is F type. Likewise, I can do the same with the drivetrain. So I'll just copy this. On a new line over here, I'll target the drive train. And if I print this out, there we go. So the way this works is we have our print function, we have our cardict, and when we target a specific key, we have to wrap this inside of square brackets as well, much like we've done with the drivetrain over here. So what else can we do with dictionaries? Well, we can actually get these values and assign them to variables. Let me show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to create a variable called model. This variable is not the same as this value. Do keep that in mind. This is an independent variable. And I'm going to set this equal to cardict.get. So I'm calling the get function, and I'm targeting the model over here. And that's going to assign the model, which is F type, to a new and independent variable. And then I'll simply just print model out. And there we go. We can actually see F type at the bottom. I can also get the keys of my dictionary if I wanted to. So what I'll do at the bottom over here is I'll create a new variable called keys, and I will set this equal to cardict.keys. And then I'll simply print the keys over here. So I'll call print keys. And if we run this now, we can see all the keys associated with our dictionary. Notice we've retrieved this object called dict_keys. And the keys here are the keys we created when we instantiated our dictionary in the first place. Great. Let's do a couple more examples. So I'll call cardict over here, and I'm going to update the drivetrain. So I'll open up some square braces. I'll say drivetrain, and then I'm going to set the drivetrain to all wheel instead of having it as the default rear wheel. And then I'll simply just print this drivetrain out. So I'll say print the cardict and retrieve the drivetrain. Notice that initially it was set to rear wheel, right? So if we run our code now, we can see that we managed to update one of the values associated with our key. In this case, that was drivetrain. And let's do one more example. So I'll move over to a new line, cardict, and notice that as it stands, we don't have a key for year. But what I can actually do is I can actually create a new key inside of this object, inside of this dictionary. So I'll say cardict, and I'll simply just say year, and let's say 2018. And then I'll print the keys to show you that we actually created a new key. And I'll also print the year of the cardict. So I'll say print cardict and give me the year. So that should be it. If we run our code now, notice that we've added a new key. We've also added a new value over here, and we managed to retrieve that value by using this line over here, which gives us the value of the year 2018. And that is it for lists as well as dictionaries in Python. Now, what exactly did we learn throughout this lesson? Well, we learned how to create a list from scratch. We also learned how to create a dictionary from scratch, and we managed to use the built-in Python functions to manipulate our lists and our dictionaries, which has given us granular control over how we can update the data items inside of our objects. Now that we've concluded with the Python short course, your journey as a Python developer has only just begun. There is a wealth of new concepts to learn, and by learning them, you will eventually become proficient in Python programming. One way to encourage the learning process in software development is by identifying a personal project that you'd like to work on. Once you've done this, continue to learn more advanced concepts in Python and apply them to your project. By doing so, the learning process becomes more enjoyable. And with that said, I'd like to wish you all the best with your career as a Python developer. Until next time, I'll see you around. Cheers.